Yes, students. So we are starting this paper, British poetry, and this is very important and interesting paper. And today we will be discussing an introduction part of British poetry. So basically, guys, in this unit, we shall grapple with certain things like literary forms known as poetry, as you all know, which is one of the offshoots of literature actually. So British poetry or a poetry like as an important genres, one of the important genres of English literature is very interesting. First, we shall raise the question: what is poetry, and how should one interpret it in general terms? And after talking about it briefly, we shall proceed to consider a few opinions of established poets and critiques to learn of the nature of poetry as well as its role and functions. And my dear students, I am sure that this popular subject will be of some interest and it will be very appealing to you as students, scholars, and of literature find it very interesting. And it will help you distinguish poetry from prose and take you into the domain of feelings and emotions, as well as those ideas even and attitudes that relate to higher goals of life and ideals to be pursued for making us self-aware and sensitive. So let's start this a journey of understanding poetry, my dear students. So under this heading, the distinctive aspect of poetry may be considered. So in this regard, let us take help from Philip Sidney, who is one of the important poets from English literature, like who said of poetry that it was almost the highest estimation of learning. Right. That means human learning realizes itself at a truly supreme level through the poetic act, and it is assumed that wisdom is crystallized in a poetry and enlightened those areas of life that generally remained shrouded in darkness. And Sydney has left some scope for other forms of literature to come equal to poetry. So to contend with them through use of words almost like for him then debate is needed to affirm the place that poetry enjoys with respect to rational and thoughtful prose. And students, this the letter actually belongs to philosopher and a philosophy where mind is active to understand the phenomena of the world surrounding us, and where mind is active to understand the phenomena of world, and also mark that philosophy defines and explains even as poetry shares and communicates, my dear students. And the target of poetry is learning, wherefore philosophy is its distinct and precise finding. And in that sense, learning is simpler since based on observation and awareness, the term of poetry and prose are, led out through deployment of specific vocabulary. And Sidney knows the value of distinction and stick to the set of words that would assist him in the, enunciation of the point. And his aim is to explore the, I would say, region of truth, as he has said, like in that poetry in the noblest nations and the languages that are known uh, has been the first light given to ignorance, and a first nurse whose milk by little and little enabled them to feed afterward of the tougher knowledge. Right. So, my dear students, Sidney wrote, as you all know, that an apology for poetry, or the defense of poetry, right? And from which he actually takes a lines and quoted above that I have discussed just with you. And this poem was published in 1580. It is like the last phase of 16th century, way before Shakespeare appeared on the English literary scene. And that means poetry had come basically under the attack at the time, and an apology or defense was needed to underpin the veracity of this art form. So, my dear students, let us not forget that for a long period of time, literature and poetry had been synonymous, and thus poetry or the whole literature had come to lost their sheer as they were, seen to be engaged with unreality. So, not with areas of contention in politics, religion, or nature that were accepted as tangible and real. So, the same may be said for times to come, as in our own time too. We connect with poetry partly defensively, but chiefly to assert its place in the real imaginative act. And one says this because knowledge soon went into in the direction of science and learning as seminal enterprise had to fend for itself through evoking support in feelings and fantasy. But the efforts to assert has continued under uninterrupted, and references can be
Yes,
made
sir.
to this. Yes, yes. Any question?
No, sir.
Yeah, guys. So this can be made to Dryden's dramatic poesy and Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballad and Coleridge and Matthew Arnold discussions on poetry and above all, like I would like to quote here T.S. Eliot's individual talent and among others, so all these take up the cause of poetic expression unmistakably in this way. And basically, poetry in all the ages has something or the other to do with the society because every writer, whosoever happens to write a poetry, is somewhere is the product of her or his own society, right? So let us look at poetry from slightly different perspective, that of social significance enshrined in the verse form, and it is not merely to do with various branches of knowledge or with imagining scenes of peace and harmony in life, as a romantic in England did in the early 19th century. So for this purpose, we pick the poet or like Jose Marti. Actually, he used to survive between 1853 to 1895. So, which that tells us about the poetic use to which the great American poet Walt Whitman put in the same century, when the Romantic lived and wrote, right? And talking of Whitman, Marty says about poetry, the some it is actually praise. So we note here words that denote longer than life developments such as the merchandise, ship's man's flight, and vast landscape. Obviously, the change occurring in America is a main issue. So, firstly, should literature take cognizance of this change? And if yes, can the mention aspect be contained in the simple description? And for Marty, the change in the condition of life should be reflected in literary writing of that, so that it prepare itself for holding the range and intensity of contemporary, happenings. And literature in general and poetry in particular take cognizance of happening around them. And also, the happening would relate to occupations and working of people that keep them in good shape. Right? Motivations of living are, guys, good source of inspiration as well as actual experimentation for improving upon existing methods of techniques to produce. So, for this reason, poetry depicts people in their states of happiness and sadness. It appears quite simply to write happy, happy or sad songs to or a tragic account of failures in life. But come to this, to think of it, like these states carry within their fabric a whole area of human survival and struggle. So, as such, the emotional states are recorded of people's working in their circumstances. And one another plane, they set standard of quality that humans created by dint of hard work and discipline. My friends, Good poetry makes the reader aware about the sad circumstances and the struggles faced by people walking in the spirit of you know mutuality and unity. So we have individuals and groups living in social ethos, and in the process of living, individuals and group construct ideas to suit their requirement. That the general nature of the activity mentioned in our discussion is the raw material that poetry uses to project its meaning and ideals, lessons drawn from life and specific morals to pursue. And above, we would say, we have cited a response to Whitman's poetry also, like talking about him and taking help from the reference to Whitman, right? So, my dear students, uh, in order to even understand the background of the poetry, so poetry in the process of historical development, is also very important, and we need to understand this thing. So from here on, like, we go into the specific area of society and history from where poetry draws its inspiration and gets molded by the existing environment that is very much instrumental in shaping the mindset of the people, or the writer. In this part of discussion, guys, we shall talk about poetic trends and also seek assistance from poets and critiques if necessary. So, what comes straight to mind in this regard are the 17th and 18th centuries. In the post Elizabethan decades, in the 17th century, my dear students, poetry as a literary medium was in use quite consistently. First, the metaphysical poetry that experimented with a new kind of emphasis. It went by wit essentially, and the emotion was sought to be held in check most of the time, and the language of poetry was distinct and self-conscious. So, guys, like, it defied conventions and offered a challenge to the reader's imagination, and this mode was of a game that poetry played. So, since drama had been in the air for a long while, and the poets enjoyed the development of dialogue, and tension prevailed at the center of the poem more in the manner of device than a naturally occurring flow. And also, the poets dealt with such philosophical concern as you say, death and love, time, ideas playing crucial role in life, human life. So these are the certain important themes that are on the surface when you discuss the poetry, because these are not only poetry, even these are the important topics, important themes of our life. So we might as well say that sort of culmination of all these happened in the way like Milton composed his poetic works, that is, Paradise Lost. So clash of views was hallmark of Milton's expression. So, my dear students, let us remember that Milton had initially planned to write Paradise Lost as a drama in the beginning, and his contention and intention was to bring issues such as the fall, the role of Satan, the God and Son, as well as other important figures in the ambit of interaction. And significantly, both Adam and Eve were to move through the perspective of sin in terms that would bring them closer to the reader and make him see the concerned tussle, like if his like as if his own tussle. So far as the poetry was concerned, Milton interpreted it as a precious lifeblood of master spirit, and this is high praise. And think of the words in the statement that they raise the level of poetry to uppermost level of human creativity. And of this kind of poetic expression, Milton is the last example, giving his all to it and showing the said expression is akin to man's cherished emotions and goals, my friend. Right. So we need to understand the poetry in the Augustan period, guys, Augustan times. However, poetry could not be sustained any longer the vigor of, that the Chaucer or Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare and John Donne had expressed through it. One may ask even about the reason behind the decline of it towards the end of the 17th century. Like it moved out of the territory of drama and trade to it came also, from pressures asking for prose. So in that context, 18th century was in the middle of the preparing ground for realistic appraisal of things, the mundane and immediate. So no more those flights either in intellect or passion that had made poetry their companions, right? And in general, issues cropping up in the wake of, mercantilism gave a different turn to poetry by confining it to the life in the city. And 18th century was, termed the 18th century actually, termed basically the Augustan age, and its deals, its ideals had, undergone vital changes. It aligned itself with stability, social manners, morality, conducts, consideration of harmony, and new definition of art at the center of which stood the heroic couplet. In that scheme, reason and intellect occupied superior position. Satire, as its form was, thought to be corrected to, of deviations from the norms. And students, the strength of the 18th century poetry lay in exposing hypocrisy, sham, and falsehood that was on display in day-to-day dealings of, people in the urban centers. That was one of the features. And the Times had to do much with the powerful section of trade and commerce that had wealth but no dignity, because people paid much attention to money, right, and monetary prosperity. So, with them, depth of emotion and feeling was never the issue, and success alone mattered. And folly among resigned supreme, those were the new realities, my dear students. So, let us even, remind ourselves, however, that literature cannot impose its own traditional norms, the ones rooted in the earlier circumstances, on the act of representation. Instead, writing has to uh, keep pace with the novelty on which it had limited control, if at all. Like, and we note in the 18th century an empowerment of ordinary folk in the century in the country, and the merchants who came to rule this roost were an, offspring of the ordinary masses, busy with production in small towns and villages, from where they were heading towards the cities, right? So this migration was, happening, and their produce was, I would say, like becoming mercantized, since it was meant to be made available to the wider section of customers away from the, place where producers lived. An increased amount of wealth in the hands of this section was the result, and at the same time, even the, this section required manners and morals going parallel to their, social influence. And at the core of their activity and inspiration was planning, appropriate articulation to communicate with fellow tradesmen, handling the class of artisans, labor skillfully, to name a few, I would say, like here. And on its sides, skillfulness would bring, like in clever way to bring around difference and disagreements, right? So here, in sum, the mind and reason were the requisites for this. And even if prosaic, like these traits suited the new ethos better than, imaginative exploring of surroundings. So put them next to this literary representation of day and the sharply satirical verse, and see that the two, these were identical in nature. And this is what 18th century poetry, such as that of Alexander Pope, was. Many of Pope's titles, contained the word essay, for example, I would like to say, like as essay on man, and essay on criticism also, like, like for examples. So the word had a somewhat connotation, then nevertheless it was indicative of the change scenario. So those became examples of the Augustan poetry that contributed towards lending support and authenticity to the society unfolding at the time, my dear students. So, and two things then, closeness to prose and drawing attention to reason, then emotion come up concretely at this stage. My dear students, I would like to say that Pope is remarkably near, near the spoke, the like his like spoken idioms, and for the sake of clarity, let us we can understand his poems when you have a time. So please try to read the poems and poetries by Alexander Pope. So in in poets like we do not see genuine talent these days. And in the same manner, critiques also do not exhibit any sense of judgment. Right? So both poets and critiques draw their wisdom from heavenly powers. The this way, like the same thing you can find in this Augustan age also. You know, and the former have their role in judging what is wrong or right, and job of letter is to write this way. So the point made by Pope is to differentiate the two from the angle of what is they and of that which they are supposed to do in society. And so the only word of contention here is heavenly powers, that denotes less the figure of God or gods than the inclination inherent in the minds of two. So further, judging and writing are placed in the context of the work and its merit, reduce work and merit to do labor and value, and the poetic line begins to resemble a statement made by shopkeeper in terms of trade. So at the same time, uh, you know Pope is no less poet than his counterpart in the 17th or 19th century, since he raises fundamentally the question of what is beneficial for society and how the act of writing can tell us about the evolution of efforts in the domain of human creativity. So indeed, my friends, he explained, or you say even in a way, he complains about the falling standard of writing in poetry and criticism. And so the irony lies in the fact that literary writing is under attack in the in his writings, in his poems, from those who do not take their job seriously and let idleness and mediocrity enter creativity. Also, mediocrity would walk enough through the mundane and average, not inspired engagement with truth and intellectual substance. So Pope's poetry is rooted firstly like in the reality of his time, and reflects secondly the rot spreading in contemporary sensibility. Right. Now I would like to discuss the romantic part and romantic uh, trend. What was the romantic trend in the British poetry? And romantic, you know, age of romanticism is a very important literary period in entire, history of English literature. So, my dear students, it is interesting to note that in 18th century, foundation had been laid for a new kind of writing that saw by imagination something that was not figuring figuring in Augustan poetry. So in the period, mundane ruled and lofty occupied backseat, and reason and intellect were at work, not the aspect of life that drew strength as well as appeal from the feelings and emotions. Right. So I have the romantic moment in mind like that recognized the place of high ideals in life and evoked the hidden areas of human interest. The romantic movement also had a close alliance with nature, as you all know that, like about William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth is almost like called the father of romantic poetry, right? And the romantic moment also had a close connection with emotions also, and the simplicity of rural life and wonders residing in dreaming about social change and human fulfillment. So, so the poems like of the last period were absent in the urban setting of mercantilism, and money, profit making, and success. So a third thing stayed in the background. Next to England, just on the other side of the border in France, a chain of momentous happening had started that would take in its grip the thinking of the whole of Europe. That was, my dear student, none other than the French Revolution. So at a higher level, the French upheaval had much in common with American war of independence a couple of decades before in the 70s, because America got freedom uh, from its colonial master in 1776, right? And American war was characterized by the spirit of anti-colonialism, and French Revolution started in 1789 at the struggle against monarchy at its center. So these two movements would not make political sense to bourgeoisie consolidation in England, right? And I am deliberately using this reference to show that the poetry might tap emotional resources of whole nation, if not of multiplicity of nations, and shake up deeply entrenched structures all over the place. So romanticism was such an example of poetic trend. Thus, I return to the nature of poetry and project a changed point of view of literature in the context. So, my dear students, let me draw your attention to the William Wordsworth would say about poetry towards the close of 18th century, you know, and at the threshold of new era of literary writings. So, I would like to quote here Wordsworth's object was to choose incident and situation from common life and to relate or describe them throughout as far as possible in selection of language really used by men, and at the same time to throw over them a certain coloring of imagination whereby ordinary things should be presented to the mind in an unusual aspect, and further and above all to make these incidents and situations interesting by tracing in them truly through not ostensibly the primary laws of our nature, or chiefly as far as regards the manner in which we associate ideas in state of excitement, humbles and rustic life was generally chosen because in that condition the essential passion of heart find a better soil in which they can attain their maturity. So these are less under restrained and speak a plainer and more emphatic language, because in that condition of life our elementary feelings coexist in state of great simplicity, and consequently it may be more accurately contemplated and more forcibly communicated because the manner of rural life germinate from those elementary feelings, and from necessary characters of rural occupations are more easily comprehended and more durable, and lastly because in that condition the passion of men are incorporated with the beautiful and permanent forms of nature. Unquote. So here, I'm sorry, and I would like to, just would like to inform you guys, I'm going to, upload this lecture on my YouTube channel as well for you, my students, so that you can prepare in a better way, in a more effective way for your exams, and to maintain better understanding of literature, specifically British poetry, right? So my dear student, you can later on, you can listen to this lecture from my, on my YouTube channel that I would update by tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Okay, so I guess like you have the link, of my, or I will place the link in the chat box.
Yes, sir. We have the link, and it would be very good if you post the videos because the exams are starting from December. It will be very helpful for us.
Yes, yes, students. So just give me a minute, because I would, paste the link of my YouTube channel once again, so that you can listen to the video lecture again and again in order to prepare for your exams. Right? This is and because it will be immensely helpful for you.